Hello all, just going to do a quick review of GCF and factoring with A equals 1. Uh, these are things we've done before, but just a quick review video in case you've forgotten. So here we go. With GCF, it's important to remember that if we're going to take anything out, it has to go into every term. Remember, terms are separated by addition and subtraction symbols. So in this particular instance, we have two terms here. What we're going to do is we're going to check coefficients first. So we've got to check in negative 72 and 64 here, something that divides evenly into both numbers. If both items are negative, it's a good idea to pull a negative out as well. But if they're not, it depends on what you're trying to do with it here. With a quadratic, later as we're factoring, we always want a to be positive. This one is not going to set up to be a quadratic, so we don't have to worry about that. But what we're going to do first is we're going to see what negative 72 and 64 have in common. So as we go to do this, we're able to pull out an 8 out of both of those. Would be the largest number we're able to pull out. So we're going to pull out an 8 out front. Then we're going to look at both terms again once we've got the coefficient taken care of. And the reason I backtrack a bit, the reason I chose 8 was because that's the largest number that divides evenly into 72 and 64. You can do it in more than one step, and I'll show you that in just a second. But this is the quick review version just in case you remember how to do that. I'm also going to look, after I look at my coefficients, look at my variables. And if both terms have the same variable, so in this case I've got an x, over here I've also got an x in both terms, I'm able to pull an x out as well. So I'm going to pull out an x. Now, to know what exponent I should pull out with it, I'm going to look at both of those variables there, and I'm going to pick the smaller exponent. So this has an exponent of 5, and that has an exponent of a 1, so I'm going to leave an exponent of a 1 there. Since I've checked both coefficients and all the variables, because there's no other variables there other than the x, this means this down here, this 8x, is my GCF. So I'm going to set up my parentheses here. And now I'm actually going to divide this out so that I know what my leftovers are. So this is the GCF. I need to know what the leftovers are, the factors here, after I've taken that GCF out. So negative 72 divided by 8 gives me negative 9. I had x to the 5th. So another way to think about this is like I have 5 x's. X times x times x times x times x. I've got 5 x's. I took one of those x's out. So that means I'm going to have x to the 4th after I take that one out. Then I'm going to look at 64 here. 64 divided by 8 is 8. And that's a positive 64 divided by positive 8 gives me positive 8. And then I'll look at my variable again. I had one x. That's another way to think about that. But I took an x out. That means I don't have any x's left. That means on this one, this right here is my answer. That would be my final answer for that. Okay? So let's look at another example. Okay, so here's a little larger one. It looks a little more intimidating, but it isn't. We're still going to go through those same processes. We're going to look at our coefficients, see what divides evenly into all of them. Then we're going to check variables one at a time as we go through each term. Now, to show you another method here, dividing, if you can't just see it straight out and divide it out, organizational method here, using your upside down divisor box here, can help you. And this is one of those things that you can do in multiple steps. So let's go through it this way. If I'm looking at just my front numbers here, so 9, 12, and negative 24, let's say I realize, okay, I know 3 will go into all of those. So I'm going to do a 3 first, and I'm going to divide it all out. Now remember, numbers only affect numbers. So this 3 is only going to be dealing with my 9, my 12, and my 24. So as I go through that, I'm going to divide that out. I get 3 divided by 9, 9 divided by 3 gives me 3. Don't change my other stuff, so I'm going to bring it down. 12 divided by 3 gets me 4. And then 24 divided by 3, negative 24 divided by 3 gets me 8. So now I look through my numbers. Do 3, 4, and 8 have anything in common left? So 3, 4, and -8 there. And I don't have any numbers in common, so I'm going to be done with that. But now it's time to look at my variables. So I'm going to look at x first. X, and x, and all of those. So they all have an x. I can pull an x out. So bring another divider box here. I'm going to pull an x out here. So again, I told you another way to think about that is to look at your x's. This is like I have 5 x's and I'm taking one out. So I'm going to have 1x or 4 x's when I'm done. So that's going to give me 3x to the 4th y squared. Again, I'm going to bring down my 4. I have 2 x's. I took one out. That gives me an x to the 1st. And the reason this works, you remember when we're dividing exponents, we're just subtracting the exponents. That's the reason this works that way. Bring down my y and my z. And that's 8. I've got x squared, so like 2 x's. I took one out. So that's going to give me x, y to the 3rd, z squared. All right. So I'm looking to get all my x's. They all still have an x in common, so that means I can pull another x out. So I'm going to do that. Another divider box here. I'm going to pull another x out. Now, I don't have to do it one at a time, but I can. So if I saw an x squared, because I remembered that smallest exponent's what gets pulled out, I could pull out an x squared and take out 2 x's and save myself a step. But if you can't, this is one of those that you can do it in multiple steps here and make it a little easier for you if you don't see the biggest amount first time. So that's why I'm going through it this way. So again, bring down my 3. I had 4 x's. I'm going to take out 1, so I'm going to have 3 x's left. Bring down my y squared plus 4. I had 1x, but I took an x out, so I don't have any x's left. So I've got y, z, minus 8. Again, I've got 1x, and I took an x out, so I don't have any x's left. So it's going to be y to the 3rd, z squared. And I'm going to show you what I was talking about earlier. If you remembered that, hey, I can just pull out the smallest exponent. And on this next one, I'm looking at my y's because I have my x's all taken care of. They don't all have an x anymore. So I look at y. I've got a y here, a y there, and a y there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the smallest exponent. So that one has a 2, that one has a 1, and that one has a 3. So I'm looking at the y to the 1st power. So I'm going to take out y to the 1st power here. So y to the 1st power. And then I'm going to divide that out. So 3x cubed, because that doesn't change. I have a y squared. I took out 1y. So I'm going to have y left, y to the 1st. Let's try to write that a little more neat. There we go. Plus 4. I have 1y, and I took a y out. So I have no y's left. I just have my z. That is what that squiggle is, in case you're not super familiar with cursive. 8y. I have 3 y's. I took 1 y out, so I have 2 y's left, so y squared, and then z squared. All right. Now I'm going to go through again. Do I have anything in common? So they don't all have x's anymore. Y, this one doesn't have a y anymore, but that one does, so they don't all have y's. I still got a z in 2 of those, but I don't have a z here, so I can't pull out a z. That means when I've got it this way, that what's left in my down here at the bottom, this right here, is what's in the parentheses. That's the leftovers. To figure out what goes in front, what's my GCF, I've got to combine what's in this line right here. So the 3, there are no other numbers to combine it with. If there were, I would multiply those. But since there aren't, I'm just going to bring it down. So I got a 3 out front. Now I've got x. I've got another x there, so I'm going to multiply those. X times x gives me x squared. Another way to think about that, I've got 2 x's, so it's going to wind up with an x squared because this is all multiplication here. And then I've got a y, and there's only a y, just the one y there. There's nothing else to combine it with, so I'm going to put a y down here. And there's my GCF. So if that way is easier for you, go that way. If not, if you're able to see those large items and pull those out, go for it that way. All right, let's look at an example of factoring. So factoring with a equals 1. A, remember, is the number in front of your squared term. It's always a good idea to just go ahead and get in the habit of checking for a GCF. Since A is equal to 1 there, our GCF is just going to be a 1, and that doesn't help us to divide out a 1 any because it doesn't change anything. So we're actually going to essentially, like we don't have a GCF this time. And I generally recommend with my students checking that you have 3 terms before you start trying to stick it in the star. If you have 2 terms, if you have A and B, your GCF is going to factor it for you. If you have A and C, the star will still work. But you got to pay attention to whether you have A and B or A and C before you start trying to stick it in the star to factor. So we have A, B, and C here, so we don't have to worry about that since we do have 3 terms. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify A, B, and C. A in this case is 1, because that's what number is in front of the x squared term. B being the number in front of the x term or the linear term, and we got to keep sign with it, so this is going to be -9. And then we have C, which is going to be the constant or the number all by itself, and again we got sign with it, so +8 there. So C equals +8. Now that we have A, B, and C identified, we're able to set up our star. So just a reminder, your star, you get A times C on the top, A on each side here, and B on the bottom. So when you go to fill these in, these numbers are going to go in the place where to replace those letters. So we're going to set up that star here. I'm going to go over here. So A times C on top, so that's 1 times 8, which gets me 8. A goes on each side, so that's 1 and 1, and then B on the bottom, which is -9. All right. So I'm going to come over to the side. What I need to do now, just like the diamond puzzles we had, you're trying to figure out what multiplies to get the top number and adds, or could be subtracts if you're thinking negative there, but adds to get the bottom number. So go over to the side here, and we're looking for factors of 8. So we set up our factor pairs: 1 times 8, 2 times 4. Look at 3. 3 doesn't go into 8 evenly. I go look at 4. 4 is already on my list. That tells me I got all of my numbers already. So what I've got to try to do is figure out which one of these pairs I can make 9 with. Don't worry about positive or negative yet. Figure out which one of these pairs I could make 9 with. So I could make 9 with 1 and 8. So I'm going to use it, 1 and 8. Now I got to figure out how to make -9 with 1 and 8. So what I'm going to wind up using is I'm going to use -1 and -8. And before I move on, I'm going to double check, because I know that adding those gets me -9. What about multiplying those? So -1 times -8 gives me +8, which is what I'm looking for. It's just a quick double check, saves you some heartache later. So I've got 1, and then I've got 8. As I'm going through this here, these sides are going to be my parentheses. These are going to be my factors. Top number is always going to give you number of x's. Number of x's, and the bottom is always going to be your constant. So now that I have top number and bottom number figured out, I'm going to plug those in. So each set here will be a set of parentheses. So I've got 1 in here. So top number's number of x's. I've got 1x. And then I've got my constant here. And I'm going to backtrack and fix something I've messed up here. That should be a -1 and a -8. About goofed that up there. So what we've got there, top number is 1x. Bottom number with sign is going to be -1. That's my constant. So -1. And then over here, number of x's on top. So this is a new set of parentheses. Number of x's on top, which is 1. So I've got my x. And then bottom number is my constant with sign, so it's going to be -8. Okay? This right here, if I had a GCF, I'm going to bring it down, but I don't have a GCF on this one, so I don't have to worry about that. This is going to be my final answer right here, factored form. Alrighty, that's been quick review of GCF and factoring. Hope everyone is doing well, and good luck to you.